The night my daughter handed me a cup of hot chocolate, I almost thanked her for being so thoughtful. 10 minutes later, I realized she wasn't trying to warm me, she was trying to kill me. What I discovered next changed everything I believed about love, family, and survival. If you're watching this video, please like and subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my story of revenge from. We love knowing how far these stories of justice and redemption travel across the world. The first thing I smelled was almonds. Not the sweet kind you roast on holidays. No, this was different. Bitter, sharp, chemical. The kind of smell your body recognizes before your mind does. The kind of smell that says danger, even if you've never had to name it out loud. "Drink it while it's hot, Mom," my daughter said. Her voice was kind, soft, loving, if you didn't know better. I looked down at the mug of hot chocolate she'd placed in front of me, steam curled up in delicate ribbons. It should have felt comforting. My daughter in my kitchen, a quiet afternoon. 3 mugs on the table. No reason in the world to be afraid. But I was. Do you know what it's like when your instincts finally wake up after sleeping for 30 years? My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 68 years old, and in that moment, sitting at my own table, I understood that something in that cup was meant to kill me. "Evelyn," she said, "please, I made it for you." She calls me Evelyn now. Not Mom. Says it sounds more adult. Her name is Lila. To other people, she is sweet and composed and generous, the perfect daughter. The kind that remembers birthdays, brings flowers, and tells everyone how much she adores her mother. People always say to me, "You're so lucky, you must be so proud." I used to smile and agree. That's what people expect from a mother. Smile, protect, excuse. Today, I felt cold. Lila had set 3 mugs on the table, one for me, one for her, one for her husband, Ryan. Ryan had stepped out to use the restroom, so his was still untouched, waiting, a little swirl of melting chocolate on top like a coffee commercial. But Lila would not stop watching me. Not Ryan. Me. "Go on," she said. "It won't taste good when it's cold." My hands were steady when I reached for the sugar jar. I've worked in finance and compliance for more than 40 years. You don't survive that long without learning to move calmly while thinking fast. I pretended to look for a spoon. I shifted things around. I laughed a little, like I was just being clumsy, just being old. And then, while her back was turned for 2 seconds, I did something that would change both of our lives forever. I switched the mugs. I slid mine in front of Ryan's chair. I slid his in front of mine. It was a small motion, quiet, harmless looking. The kind of thing you wouldn't even notice unless you were already suspicious, which, until that exact moment, I had never allowed myself to be with my own daughter. Lila turned back around, and she smiled at me. That smile. I have to tell you about that smile. I have seen it 1,000 times. School plays, anniversaries, police interviews, hospital rooms, funerals. She wears it like jewelry. It is soft, humble, grateful. It makes people lean in and want to protect her. That smile has gotten her out of so many things I convinced myself weren't her fault. But now, for the first time in 31 years, I saw something under it. Impatience. Not worry, not fear for Ryan, not love for me. Impatience. Like a hunter waiting for the trap to finally snap. "Drink," she whispered. I lifted the mug to my mouth. I didn't drink. I just breathed in. There it was again, bitter almond. You may not know what cyanide smells like. I didn't either, not officially. But your body knows. Some part of you carries warnings you didn't even know you'd stored. My stomach went ice cold. My scalp tingled. My vision sharpened in this awful, horrible way where the world suddenly becomes so clear it almost hurts. And then Ryan came back. He was laughing about something from the other room, wiping his hands on a towel. Sorry, he said. "Did I miss the toast?" He sat. He picked up the mug in front of him, the mug that 2 minutes ago had been mine, and he drank. 17 minutes later, I was kneeling on my own kitchen floor, and the man I loved like a son was dying in front of my refrigerator. It happened fast, but also in slow motion. His body jerked, then locked. His jaw clenched so hard I thought he would shatter his teeth. His fingers curled in. His eyes rolled back but stayed open, wide and empty. White foam spilled from the corner of his mouth. His heels slammed against the tile. There was this horrible noise coming from his throat. Not quite a scream, not quite a choke. Something in between. I know this is an ugly thing to admit, but I'm going to tell you anyway. The first emotion I felt was not sadness. It was confirmation. I was right. My body had been right. That drink was meant to kill. I grabbed my phone. My hands were shaking so hard I nearly dropped it. I have signed contracts worth millions without a tremor. I have sat across from men in suits who wanted to destroy me and never flinched. But seeing Ryan like that and knowing why turned my blood to glass. 911. What's your emergency? My son-in-law, I said. He's having a seizure. He drank something, and now he's, please hurry. Beside me, Lila dropped to her knees and started screaming. Ryan, baby, no, stay with me, please, somebody help him. It was a performance so good I almost believed it. Her voice cracked, her shoulders shook. She grabbed his face and sobbed over him like a woman in a hospital drama begging her lover not to die. If you had walked in that second with no context, you would have thought you were looking at the most heartbroken wife in America. But I was there, and I saw her face. Her face was not crying. Her face was thinking. Her eyes weren't on Ryan. They were on me. Studying me, measuring me, waiting. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I am telling you that I watched my daughter watch me while her husband lay on my kitchen floor convulsing from the poison that was meant for me. And in that moment, something inside me finally broke in the right direction. Because until that night, I would have defended Lila to the grave. I would have sworn she was sensitive, misunderstood, too soft for this world. I would have called anyone cruel for even suggesting she was dangerous. I had explanations ready for every dead pet, every accident, every sudden tragedy that seemed to follow her like a shadow. I had spent 31 years covering for her without letting myself say the word that lived under all of it. Now I could finally say it, even if I said it only in my head. My daughter is trying to murder me. That is not a sentence any mother should ever have to speak. By the time the paramedics arrived, Ryan's body had gone worse, then still. They worked fast, shouted numbers, pushed air, needles, things I couldn't identify. I heard someone say, possible toxic ingestion. I heard someone else say he's still got a pulse. I heard myself say, over and over, please don't let him die. Please don't let him die. And I realized my voice sounded just like hers. They loaded him. Doors slammed. Sirens lit up the night. And then it was quiet. Just me, 68 years old, with cocoa rings still wet on my kitchen table. And Lila, looking at me with wide, perfect, scared daughter eyes. Mom, she whispered, what just happened? Here is what I wanted to say. You just happened. Here is what I did say. Nothing. Because in that moment, in that silence, I understood something even darker than poison, and I need you to hear this part. She hadn't planned to kill Ryan. She had planned to kill me. And in her mind, I had ruined it. I had ruined her timing. I had ruined her story. I had ruined her exit plan. Think about that. Think about the level of calculation it takes to hand your own mother a cup of hot chocolate and expect her to die quietly in her own kitchen so you can collect what you think you deserve. That's the moment I stopped being mom and started being something else. A witness. A threat. A target she had failed to eliminate. Listen to me, because I am going to ask you for something, and it matters. Stories like this do not get told for women my age. We are told to keep the family secrets and not make trouble. We are told to be quiet, be nice, be forgiving, be grateful someone still visits. I am done being quiet. If you want me to keep telling you exactly how I found the poison, exactly what I uncovered in her house that night, and how I put my own daughter in handcuffs for what she's done, subscribe right now and let me know to keep going. That is how you keep this story alive, and that is how you keep women like me alive. Before we move on, I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, because your answer is going to tell you something about yourself. Imagine you are in my kitchen. Imagine it is your child standing there, smiling, telling you to drink while it's still hot. You smell something wrong. Your stomach goes cold. What do? A. You drink it anyway, because you could never believe your own child would hurt you. B. You do what I did. Tell me, A or B? I woke up the next morning to the silence of a house that had stopped pretending to be normal. The smell of bleach still lingered in the kitchen, faint but persistent, mixed with that invisible memory of almonds I would never forget. Ryan was in the hospital, alive but sedated. The police had left around midnight after taking my statement. Lila had stayed the night in the guest room, crying just enough to make it believable. When I looked at her door that morning, something inside me had already shifted. For the first time, I wasn't her mother. I was her observer. I made coffee instead of cocoa. I poured it black. I didn't ask if she wanted any. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the place where Ryan's body had fallen, the pattern of the tile still faintly discolored. I remembered his hand reaching for mine as he struggled to breathe. Don't! Let her! Those were his last words before they carried him out. He didn't have to finish the sentence. I already knew who he meant. The police report had called it a suspected accidental poisoning. I almost laughed when I read the copy they left me. Accidental. The word felt like a cruel joke, like calling a hurricane unexpected rain. But I had played along. That night, when the officers asked if I suspected foul play, I shook my head. I wasn't ready. Not yet. I needed proof, not suspicion. At 9 a.m., Lila came downstairs in one of my old sweaters. She looked soft, fragile, and I realized that was her armor. "How's Ryan?" she asked, voice trembling perfectly on cue. "They said he's stable," I replied. "Doctors are running tests." She nodded. "I can't believe this happened. Maybe something in the cocoa mix? You should sue the company." I studied her face. The lie came too easily. "Maybe," I said, pretending to consider it. "We should find the box." I watched her stiffen before catching herself. "Oh, I threw it out," she said quickly. "Didn't want the smell around." That was mistake number 1. I nodded, pretending to accept it. "Of course." After she left for the hospital, I opened the trash. It was empty, too empty. She had taken it out, scrubbed the bin clean, but she had forgotten one thing, the drain trap under the sink. I unscrewed it carefully, poured its contents into a glass jar, and sealed it. My years in accounting had taught me something valuable: never leave without a paper trail. By noon, I drove to a private lab 40 minutes away. "Water contamination test," I told the clerk. He didn't need to know the truth. He just nodded, took the sample, and said results would be ready in 2 days. When I returned home, I noticed the curtains in the living room were drawn. Lila never drew the curtains. I stepped inside quietly and froze. My desk drawers were open. My folders, financial, insurance, property, all shuffled. Her second mistake. I heard her humming upstairs. I left everything as it was. Let her think I was still naive. Let her believe she was winning. That evening, she came back from the hospital with updates. "He's awake," she said. "He's asking for you." "Me?" I raised a brow. She smiled faintly. "He said you saved him." For a second, I felt the smallest pulse of relief. Maybe I had. Maybe there was still a chance to tell him what really happened. "I'll visit tomorrow," I said. That night, I didn't sleep. I reread old letters, bank statements, Lila's adoption papers. I found the first drawing she made when she was 6, a stick figure with a big smile holding a flower. I wanted so badly to believe that child had ever been real. The next morning, I visited Ryan. He was pale, weak, but conscious. His first words to me were not, "Hello." They were, "Check her bag." I frowned. "What?" He winced. "Hospital room, hidden, locker." His voice trailed into a whisper. "She said she'd finish it. Later." I felt the world tilt again. After the nurse stepped out, I opened the small storage cabinet near his bed. Inside was Lila's purse. She'd left it there deliberately, confident no one would dare search it. But I did. Inside, beneath the makeup kit and wallet, was a small metal vial. Silver, label peeled off. When I opened it, The same bitter almond smell filled the air. I sealed it again and put it in my coat pocket. Ryan opened his eyes weakly. "Don't let her know," he murmured. "She'll try again." When I stepped out of the room, Lila was in the hallway, smiling at me like a nurse. "He looks better, doesn't he?" "Yes," I said, "he does." That was the third mistake, thinking I couldn't lie as well as she could. I walked straight to the nearest police officer on duty. "I think my daughter is in possession of a toxic substance," I said calmly. He asked a few questions, noted the item, and called his superior. Within an hour, detectives arrived. They asked if I wanted to press charges. I said, "Not yet. Let me bring you everything first." Back home, I searched her bedroom. Beneath her travel bag, inside a shoebox, was a folder labeled Estate. Inside were printouts of my will, life insurance, bank details, all recently copied. One note read, "Transfer after death. File claim within 30 days." I stared at it until my eyes blurred. My daughter had written out my death plan like a business transaction. That night I called an old friend, Detective Marjorie Hill, retired but sharp as glass. "Marjorie," I said, "I think my daughter's trying to kill me." There was silence, then a sigh. "You always hoped this day wouldn't come." We met at her house 2 hours later. I showed her the vial, the lab receipt, the folder. She didn't look surprised. "You need to get evidence of intent," she said. "Not just poison-proof, she meant it for you." "How?" Marjorie smiled grimly. "Invite her back to the scene." That plan turned into the first deliberate trap I ever set for my own child. The next day, I called Lila. "Come home," I said softly. "I made cocoa again. I want to talk." Her voice brightened immediately. "Of course, Mom. I'll be right there." When she arrived, the table was set the same way. 3 mugs, steam rising. But this time, there were cameras hidden in the corners. Marjorie's idea, discreet and recording. Lila sat down, studying me. "You're not still upset, are you?" "I'm just grateful you're safe," I said, "and that Ryan's alive." She smiled, reaching for a mug. Maybe luck's finally on our side. I watched her pick up the one in front of her, the one I had filled with nothing but milk and sugar. Then I leaned forward and said quietly, "Tell me, sweetheart, if I had died that night, how long would it have taken you to file the insurance claim?" Her hand froze midair. The mask cracked for the first time. "What?" she whispered. I smiled. "You heard me." That was when she realized the game had changed and that her mother wasn't the prey anymore. Lila didn't answer my question. She only stared, her face perfectly still, the corners of her mouth trembling as if deciding whether to smile or bare her teeth. The silence between us thickened. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. For the first time, my daughter's eyes didn't look human to me. They were glassy, calculating, already rewriting the story in her head, deciding how she'd explain this later. "You think I'd hurt you?" she finally said, her voice soft, tremulous, weaponized innocence. I leaned back in my chair. "I think you've been preparing for my death for quite some time." Her expression shifted so fast it could have been missed by a blink. Then she smiled, calm and dismissive, as if I were an old woman losing her mind. "Mom, that's ridiculous. You've been under so much stress. I get it. But accusing me of—" I interrupted. "Of murder?" The word landed like a gunshot between us. Lila flinched but quickly recovered. "Do you hear yourself? You sound crazy." That was the moment I realized she had rehearsed this. She'd been ready for confrontation, just not ready for proof. I reached for the folder on the counter, the one I'd found in her room, labeled Estate. I opened it, slowly, deliberately. "You copied my will, Lila. You printed my bank statements. You even wrote out a to-do list for after I was gone. Item 1, transfer funds. Item 2, file insurance. Item 3, move in with Ryan's name removed from the deed." Her breath caught. "You went through my drawers," I continued. "My safe. You knew the passwords. You thought I'd never notice because you assumed I still trusted you." Her face hardened. "You're delusional." I almost laughed. "Am I?" "Because the lab results came back this morning." I held up the report, crisp and white. "Cyanide residue confirmed. It wasn't an accident. And it wasn't the cocoa mix, it was deliberate poisoning. The police have a copy. For a flicker of a second, the mask cracked. Her eyes went cold, flat. You went to the police? I went to the truth. Something dangerous glimmered in her expression, then recognition that she'd lost control. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping across the floor. You have no idea what you've done, she hissed. Neither did you, I said quietly. Until now. She grabbed her coat and stormed toward the door. I didn't stop her. The cameras were rolling, and Marjorie was parked across the street waiting for my signal. When the door slammed, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Within 10 minutes, 2 unmarked cars pulled up. Detective Lewis entered, calm but firm. We've got enough, he said. You did good, Mrs. Carter. I didn't feel good. I felt hollow. The woman they were about to arrest was my daughter, my only child. I had carried her in my arms, bandaged her knees, held her through nightmares. But tonight, I was the one who had to stop hers. By evening, she was in custody. They found the remaining cyanide in a medicine bottle, labeled as vitamins. When the detective showed it to me, I had to turn away. The label read, "For Mom." The next day, reporters gathered outside the house. I didn't speak. I let the facts speak for me. Ryan remained in the hospital, slowly recovering, the poison still in his system but his will to live stronger than ever. When I visited, his first words were, "Did they catch her?" "Yes," I said. "Good," he whispered. But later that night, I sat in the dark living room and let the reality settle. The investigation unearthed more than I'd been ready for: credit cards in my name, life insurance policies forged with my signature, a series of suspicious deaths connected to Lila's past relationships. One ex-boyfriend's parents had died in a house fire. Another partner had fallen from a balcony after changing his will, all classified as accidents. The deeper I looked, the more monstrous the picture became. My daughter wasn't just dangerous, she was experienced. Marjorie came by that evening, bringing a bottle of tea and a quiet sort of pity I couldn't stand. "They'll charge her with attempted murder for now," she said gently. "But if the other evidence holds, this will go much further. Evelyn, I need you to be ready for that." "I thought I was," I said, "but every time I think I've hit the bottom, it gets darker." She nodded. "That's what happens when the truth's been buried for too long." I didn't sleep again that night. I walked through every room of the house, touching the furniture, the walls, the pictures. Every memory was layered with doubt now. When had she started seeing me as an obstacle? When had love turned into resentment? 2 days later, I was summoned for an official interview. The detectives played me the footage from the hidden cameras. Lila's voice so calm, asking, "You think I'd hurt you?" Her hand trembling, then steady. Her words, "You sound crazy." It was all their intent, deceit, control. They thanked me for my cooperation. I went home and vomited in the sink. That afternoon, a call came from the hospital. Ryan had regained enough strength to speak clearly. "Evelyn," he said, his voice rough but steady, "you need to know something. Before she tried with you, she tried with me." I closed my eyes. "I know." "She told me you were sick," he continued. "That you were losing your memory, that you'd made mistakes with the money. She said I needed to help her take care of you before it got worse. She said it was for your own good. The manipulation was textbook. Turn one person against another, create a false story of decline, then control the assets. I felt sick realizing how close she'd come to making everyone believe it. That night, the police came again. This time, they brought a search warrant for Lila's storage unit. What they found made the national news. Journals, ledgers, lists of names with dates, dosages, and causes of death. Old photos clipped from obituaries. She had kept trophies, even notes about reactions. Too fast, didn't suffer, perfect. I was sitting at my dining table when Detective Lewis placed one of the journals in front of me, sealed in plastic. "We think she started young," he said quietly, "maybe in her teens." The pages were filled with a handwriting I knew by heart. Round, neat letters. She used to write me cards in that same style. I looked at the ink and said, "She was always proud of her penmanship." Lewis hesitated. "Mrs. Carter, are you sure you're up for testifying when the time comes?" "Yes," I said, because if I don't, she'll rewrite the story again, and this time, she doesn't get to. The day after that, they called to confirm. Lila had been formally charged with multiple counts, attempted murder, forgery, and the reopening of 2 prior suspicious deaths. The news reporters called her the cyanide daughter. I stood at my kitchen window that night, staring at the garden she used to play in as a child. The moonlight hit the swing set she'd once begged me to build. I could almost see her there again, hair flying, laughter echoing. But that little girl was gone long before I noticed. What replaced her had learned to mimic love, to weaponize trust. I closed the curtains and whispered, "It ends now." The following morning, I met Marjorie at the courthouse. She handed me the witness packet. "This is where it changes," she said. I nodded. No more hiding, no more excuses. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace, because sometimes justice isn't loud. Sometimes it's the quiet act of standing in front of what's left of your family and saying, "You will not destroy me anymore." The courthouse smelled of dust, paper, and coffee gone cold, a strange mix of bureaucracy and tension that seemed to cling to every surface. The trial of state verse. Lila Carter began on a rainy Thursday morning, and though the storm outside rattled the windows, nothing was louder than the silence that filled the courtroom when they brought her in. She walked with the same grace she had always carried, her wrists bound in cuffs that glittered under the fluorescent lights like cruel jewelry. Her hair was perfectly combed, her blouse pressed. The same woman who used to beg me to braid her hair before school now stood accused of trying to murder her own mother. The defense called it a misunderstanding. The prosecution called it premeditated matricide. I called it what it was, an unmasking. Ryan sat in the front row beside me, still pale but stronger, his fingers trembling as he reached for mine. When the bailiff asked for quiet, I could feel his pulse through our joined hands, steady but fragile, like everything left in our lives. The district attorney, a calm woman named Caroline Vega, began her opening statement. "This is not a story of sudden rage or accident. This is a story of calculation, deceit, and a woman who weaponized love for profit." Each word sliced the air like glass. When it was my turn to testify, my knees almost gave out as I walked to the stand. I had rehearsed this moment for weeks, but nothing prepares you for looking your child in the eye while describing the moment she tried to kill you. "Mrs. Carter," the DA said, "can you tell the court what happened on the night of May 14th? I took a breath. "She made me hot chocolate," I began. My voice didn't shake. "She told me to drink it while it was still hot." I told them about the smell, the switch, Ryan's collapse, the vial, the forged papers, every detail I could remember. And through it all, Lila sat expressionless, her eyes fixed on me like I was a witness in her movie rather than her mother. When I mentioned the journals, the lists of names, the dosages, the diary entries, the courtroom stirred. The judge called for order. I kept speaking, steady and clear. She didn't just plan to kill me. She documented how she would feel after I was gone. Caroline handed me one of the journals, sealed in evidence plastic. "Can you confirm this is your daughter's handwriting?" I nodded. I taught her to write it that way. There was an ache in my throat when I said that, something that felt almost like mourning. I remembered how proud she'd been the first time she wrote her name. Now that same handwriting listed, lives ended and poisons used. The defense attorney rose, adjusting his glasses. "Mrs. Carter, is it possible your age, stress, and emotional trauma have caused some confusion? Could it be that you misinterpreted her intentions?" I looked him straight in the eye. "If you'd smelled what I smelled that night, you wouldn't be asking me that question." A ripple of quiet laughter broke through the tension. Even the judge's lips twitched before he hid it behind his hand. The cross-examination continued for another hour, full of tactics I'd seen 100 times in business: discredit, redirect, distort, but I had spent a lifetime balancing numbers and catching lies. I recognized every trick. When it was over, I stepped down and looked once more at my daughter. Her expression hadn't changed, but her eyes had. For the first time, there was something behind them that wasn't control or arrogance. It was fear. Ryan testified next. His voice shook, but his account was powerful. "She told me Mom was losing her memory," he said, glancing toward me. She said she was helping, not hurting. I believed her, but then I found the medicine bottles in her drawer empty, and I realized she'd been giving me the same thing she gave Mom. He paused, tears forming. If Evelyn hadn't switched those mugs, I'd be dead. That sentence echoed through the room. Even the jury shifted uncomfortably. When court adjourned for the day, I stepped outside into the drizzle. Reporters swarmed like flies, shouting questions. Do you forgive her? How does it feel to testify against your own child? I didn't answer. Forgiveness is easy to say and impossible to feel when your heart has been used as a weapon. That night, I sat in my hotel room with Marjorie, who had been there every step of the way. She poured 2 cups of tea. You did well, she said. Did I? I stared at the rain against the window. It didn't feel like winning. It felt like burying something. She nodded. That's what justice is sometimes. The next morning, the trial continued. Forensic experts detailed the chemical analysis. Toxicologists explained how cyanide worked, how precise the dosage had been. One of them said, "It's rare to see this level of control outside of professional settings." Control. That word defined her. Then came the twist none of us expected. The defense called their surprise witness a psychiatrist named Dr. Alan Pierce, who claimed to have treated Lila years earlier. He spoke about childhood trauma, abandonment, and alleged abuse stories so warped and false they didn't even resemble our lives. She has a dissociative condition, he said. She doesn't fully comprehend her actions. My attorney leaned toward me and whispered, "They're playing the insanity card." It was predictable, but still, hearing it made my stomach turn. They were trying to make her the victim again. During recess, I saw Lila watching me from across the room. When our eyes met, she smiled faintly as if to say, "You can't kill what people want to save." But this time, the story didn't bend her way. The prosecution had evidence of clear planning emails, insurance drafts, purchase receipts for cyanide under a false name. She knew what she was doing. The final blow came when they played an audio recording recovered from her phone, a voice memo dated 3 weeks before the poisoning. Her voice calm and deliberate. May 14th. Cocoa mix ready. Make it peaceful. She won't feel a thing. The courtroom froze. You could have heard a pin drop. I didn't cry. Not then. I had no tears left. When the judge finally read the verdict, the words sounded almost unreal. Guilty on all counts. Lila blinked once, twice, but didn't speak. The officers led her away, her posture still straight, unbroken. As she passed me, she turned her head slightly and whispered, "You'll die alone." I didn't respond, because for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of being alone. Outside, the rain had stopped. The air smelled clean, sharp, almost sweet. Ryan stood beside me, holding my coat. "It's over," he said softly. "No," I told him, "it's beginning." And I meant it. Because justice, when it finally arrives, doesn't end a story, it rewrites it. And I was ready to start living in the version where I survived. After the verdict, the courtroom emptied like a church after confession, people whispering, papers rustling, the echo of justice hanging in the air. I sat still for a long time, staring at the wooden grain of the bench in front of me. The gavel had fallen, the words "guilty on all counts" had been spoken, and yet I didn't feel triumph. I felt a kind of silence that comes after a storm, not peace, but exhaustion. Outside, the world moved on. Cameras flashed, headlines spun, the cyanide daughter sentenced to life without parole. I didn't read them. What could they possibly know about what it feels like to watch your child disappear in handcuffs, about realizing that justice and grief can live in the same heartbeat? Ryan was beside me, steady as ever. His face was still pale, but his eyes were clear now, free of her shadow. "You did it," he said. "You saved both of us." I shook my head. "No," I whispered. "I just stopped her." For weeks afterward, I lived like a ghost in my own house. Every sound, water boiling, a spoon clinking against a cup, dragged me back to that night. I threw out every mug I owned. I couldn't bear the sight of cocoa powder. Even the smell of almonds made my throat tighten. Trauma has a way of staying in the walls. Marjorie came often, sitting across from me with her calm detective eyes and motherly patience. "You need to move," she said one evening. "This house has too many echoes." She was right. One morning, I packed my life into boxes, hired a small moving truck, and left the house without looking back. I drove south, following the winding road until the mountains rose in the distance like a promise. Asheville, North Carolina, a place I'd once visited decades ago with my late husband, before everything fractured. Back then, we'd said, "Maybe one day we'll retire here." I smiled bitterly at the irony. I hadn't come to retire, I'd come to begin again. The house I bought was small, with a porch that caught the morning light. It smelled of cedar and rain. The first night, I slept without nightmares. The second night, I dreamed of Lila as a child, running barefoot through the garden, laughing. When I woke up, the image dissolved before guilt could attach itself. Weeks turned into months. Ryan visited often. He was thinner, still healing, but determined to rebuild. "You saved my life," he said one afternoon, "so I want to do something with it." He had decided to start a support group for survivors of domestic manipulation and psychological abuse. "You should help me," he added. At first, I resisted. I didn't want to talk about what had happened, but he looked at me with those quiet, honest eyes, the eyes of someone who had also lost everything, but chosen to keep living. So I said yes. We called it the Second Dawn Foundation. The name came from something he said while recovering. The first dawn shows what's broken. The second shows what can grow again. Our first meeting had 3 people, then 10, then 30. Seniors who'd been financially exploited by children, widows who'd lost everything to scams, women who'd survived silent forms of cruelty that no one wanted to believe. They came with trembling hands and stories they'd never spoken aloud. I recognized that look, the mixture of shame and disbelief, the silent question. How did I not see it? I told them what I wished someone had told me, that love without boundaries isn't kindness, it's self-erasure, that protecting yourself isn't betrayal, it's survival. Word spread, local papers ran stories, donations came in. Within a year, the Second Dawn Foundation had become a registered nonprofit. We started small scholarships for seniors returning to school, funded therapy sessions, hosted workshops about inheritance protection and psychological grooming. Every time I stood at the podium, my voice grew steadier. But healing isn't linear. Some nights, I would still find myself sitting in the dark, wondering if I could have changed her. If earlier love, earlier truth, might have rewritten the ending. The therapist I eventually agreed to see told me, "You're confusing responsibility with regret. You didn't make her what she became. You only refused to let her finish the story." One spring morning, nearly 2 years after the trial, I received a letter. The return address was the state penitentiary. My hands trembled as I opened it. The handwriting was hers, still precise, still beautiful. "Dear Mom," it began, "I hope you're proud. The world believes your version now. You've built yourself into a saint. But remember, I came from you. You can't bury what's in your blood." No apology, no remorse, just venom, wrapped in ink. I burned the letter on the porch, watched the flames curl the edges until the paper turned to ash. Then I went inside and wrote a check $25,000 to fund a new program for women escaping psychological abuse. That was my answer. Months later, Ryan met a woman named Claire, a quiet nurse with warm eyes and 2 adopted children, Charlie and Anne. They were shy at first, but when they visited, they filled my house with the sound of life again. Charlie liked to help me in the garden. Anne liked to draw. One afternoon, she handed me a picture me, Ryan, her, Charlie, and their dog standing in front of my porch under a bright blue sky. She'd written one word at the top, family. I looked at it for a long time. That night, I placed the drawing on my mantel, where my old family photos used to hang. For years, I had believed that blood defined loyalty, that motherhood was unbreakable. But now, I knew the truth. Family isn't inherited. It's chosen, nurtured, and protected. On the day the Second Dawn Foundation opened its first community center, Ryan gave a speech that left the entire room in tears. "When someone tries to destroy you," he said, "don't let them. Build something in the space they tried to burn." He looked at me then, smiling. "Evelyn taught me that." The applause was loud, but what I felt was quiet peace. After everyone left, I stood alone in the garden behind the new center. The air was cool, the mountains glowing gold in the distance. I thought of Lila, not the criminal, but the baby I once held, the little girl who used to fall asleep on my chest. I whispered, "I forgive you," not because she deserved it, but because I refused to let her hold me hostage any longer. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't mercy for the other person, it's freedom for yourself. That evening, as I locked the doors and turned out the lights, I realized something profound. For years, my life had been defined by the fear of what she might take from me. But now, everything I had left the laughter of children, the foundation's purpose, the peace of my own breath was mine again. And for the first time in decades, I felt alive. Justice had given me safety, purpose had given me meaning, but forgiveness, real forgiveness, had given me back my life. The first winter in Asheville came quietly. Snow fell in soft layers over the porch railings, muting the world into stillness. I had lived through storms, real ones, emotional ones, but this kind of quiet was new. The kind that doesn't ask for fear or vigilance, it just asks for presence. I would wake early, make tea instead of coffee, and sit by the window watching the light climb over the mountains. I had started a life that belonged entirely to me. The Second Dawn Foundation had grown beyond anything Ryan or I imagined. We now had 2 centers, one in Asheville and another in Raleigh, run by volunteers who had their own stories of survival. Women came from all over, sometimes with nothing but a small bag and a shaking voice. We listened. We helped them rebuild from the wreckage. I saw my old self in every one of them, the version of me who had once believed silence was safety. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Ryan stopped by with Claire and the children. They brought dinner, homemade stew, and cornbread, and laughter filled my house again. Anne ran to show me her new drawing, another picture of our little family. "You're the heart," she said, pointing at the center figure. I smiled, though my eyes burned. I wasn't used to being called the heart of anything anymore. Later that night, when everyone had gone, I sat alone at the kitchen table. For a moment, I let my thoughts drift back to the life I had before all of this, the life where my daughter called me Mom, where I still believed I could fix her. Guilt has a way of sneaking in through quiet moments, whispering that you could have done more. But then I would remember her last words in the courtroom, "You'll die alone." She was wrong. Months passed. One morning, I received a call from the penitentiary. "Mrs. Carter, this is Warden Harris. I thought you should know your daughter has requested a visit." My throat tightened. I hadn't seen her in nearly 3 years. "What does she want?" I asked. "She says she has something to say to you. She's been quieter lately." Quieter. The word meant nothing coming from someone like her. Yet, I agreed. Not for closure, there's no such thing, but because some ghosts demand to be faced. The visit was set for a Tuesday. The prison was gray, the air metallic. When they brought her in, she looked older, thinner, her hair streaked with silver. But her eyes, those sharp, endless eyes, were unchanged. "Hello, Mom," she said, as if we'd met for lunch. "Why did you want to see me?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "You're doing well. I saw the article about your foundation." "It's not yours to be proud of," I replied. She shrugged. "Still, you learned something from me, didn't you? Control, precision, presentation. I taught you more than you realize." Her words made me want to laugh and cry at once. "You didn't teach me control, Lila," I said softly. "You taught me survival." She leaned forward. "You've always been dramatic. That's why people like you, they think you're brave. But tell me, Mom, when you look in the mirror, do you ever wonder which one of us the world will remember?" It was her last attempt at power. The last weapon she had left her need to be unforgettable. I stood, ready to leave. "The difference," I said, "is that I'll be remembered for saving lives. You'll be remembered for taking them." For the first time, she looked away. And that was enough. I didn't need an apology. I just needed her silence. I left the prison and drove without destination. The sun was setting, gold spilling across the hills. For years, my life had been about endurance. That day, it became about release. Spring came again, and with it, the Foundation's 5th anniversary. We hosted an event in the new community garden, a space where survivors could plant something living, a symbol of growth after devastation. As I walked among the rows of lavender and rosemary, I saw Claire helping the children water the seedlings, their laughter rising like music. Ryan took the microphone, his voice warm and steady. 5 years ago, this began with 2 people and a single truth that no one should have to rebuild alone. Today, that truth has grown into something bigger than us. He looked at me and smiled. Evelyn showed us that surviving isn't the end. It's the start of the story you write next. When it was my turn to speak, I paused before the crowd, letting the quiet settle. I used to believe that family was destiny, I began. That blood determined who you belonged to, but I learned that love can be chosen, rebuilt, and reborn. It's not about where you come from, it's about what you create after everything's been taken. Afterward, Anne slipped her hand into mine. "Grandma," she asked, "why do people plant things if they take so long to grow?" "Because waiting," I said, "is how you learn to believe again." That night, I sat on the porch, watching fireflies blink across the garden. The house no longer felt haunted. I could finally breathe without listening for footsteps that weren't there. Forgiveness had softened the edges of memory, but I didn't mistake it for reconciliation. I hadn't forgiven to save her, I had forgiven to save myself. In the distance, the church bells chimed 8 times. I thought of all the women who had come through our doors, their eyes hollow, their voices quiet, and how one by one they'd found strength again. Maybe that was what redemption really looked like, not a single act, but a continuous choice to keep going. I thought of Lila for the last time, not with anger, not even with sadness, just acceptance. She was part of my story, but not the whole of it. As the wind carried the scent of blooming jasmine, I whispered to the night, "It ends here." And in that stillness, surrounded by life I had nurtured from ruin, I realized the truth I had spent years running toward. Survival is not the same as living. Surviving is the pause between breaths. Living is the moment you finally exhale and trust that nothing and no one can take it from you again. Autumn came to Asheville wrapped in gold. Leaves turned into fire along the Blue Ridge, and the mountains looked as if they'd been lit from within. I remember standing on my porch that first crisp morning, a cup of tea warming my hands, and realizing I hadn't felt afraid in a very long time. For most of my life, I'd existed in reaction, reacting to lies, to betrayal, to survival itself. But now, the air smelled of beginnings, not endings. The foundation was thriving beyond anything I had imagined. We had grown into a network of hundreds, each story different, each one a thread in something larger than pain. Our mission had expanded beyond protection and advocacy. It had become education. We began working with schools, churches, and local law enforcement to train people on how manipulation hides behind affection. Every time I stood before an audience, I saw faces that looked like mine, people who had learned too late what love can cost. One afternoon, after a long workshop, I received a letter with no return address. It wasn't from the prison this time. The envelope was ivory, the handwriting neat, almost hesitant. Inside was a small card and a single sentence. "I hope you found peace. I think I have." There was no signature, but I knew it was Lila. The words didn't sting the way I expected them to. I placed the card in my desk drawer and whispered, "Maybe that's enough." I didn't respond. Ryan and Claire's family had become my anchor. Charlie was learning guitar, and Anne had started writing stories, short tales about brave girls who saved themselves. Sometimes, she'd show me her drafts and ask, "Do you think stories can change people, Grandma?" I always answered, "They already do. They changed me." That winter, Ryan proposed that I record a public talk for the Foundation's new online campaign, a message about resilience and late-life rebirth. "People need to hear it from you," he said. "You're the reason this place exists." At first, I hesitated. I had spent years avoiding the public gaze, letting the Foundation speak for me. But something in me wanted to close the circle. Maybe, after all this time, I was ready to tell the story not as a confession, but as a gift. We filmed it in the garden behind the center. The air was still, the sky was soft gray. I sat on a wooden bench surrounded by lavender and rosemary, plants that had survived frost and bloom. The cameras rolled, and I spoke. "I used to think my story ended with betrayal," I began. "But the truth is, endings are just disguised beginnings. The day I discovered my daughter had tried to kill me, I thought my life was over. I thought the world had ended in a single poisoned sip. But what I didn't know then was that surviving that moment was the first step toward understanding what love truly means. Love isn't obedience. It isn't silence. It isn't giving everything until there's nothing left. Real love, the kind that saves, begins when you finally love yourself enough to walk away from what destroys you." The words came naturally, almost like breathing. For the first time, I spoke without trembling, without trying to convince anyone of my sanity or my innocence. I spoke as a woman who had lived through hell and found light on the other side. When the recording went live, the response was overwhelming. Letters poured in from all over the country, retirees, mothers, widows, daughters, all saying the same thing. "You told my story." Some had left abusive families, others were fighting to protect their inheritance, their homes, their dignity. Each message reminded me that my pain had become something useful, something alive. A few months later, the foundation received a federal grant to expand nationally. Ryan became executive director, while I shifted to an advisory role. It felt right. I had built the fire. Now it was time to let others tend it. But that transition wasn't just professional, it was emotional. For so long, my identity had been tied to survival and rebuilding. I had become a symbol for others, but I still had to rediscover who I was beyond the story. That spring, I took a train to the coast alone. The sea had always called to me its rhythm, its mercy. I rented a small cabin overlooking the water. Mornings were spent walking barefoot along the shore, the tide washing over my footprints before I could turn back. I began writing again, not about pain, but about life. The sound of rain on cedar, the laughter of children, the beauty of ordinary mornings. On the final evening of that trip, I wrote a letter I never sent. "Dear Lila, I don't know where you are within yourself now, peace or pretense, but I want you to know that I survived you, not in spite of you, but because of what knowing you forced me to learn. I learned how to protect my spirit, how to love without surrendering, how to exist without apology. Wherever you are, I hope you find a truth of your own, not forgiveness, but clarity. Mom." I folded the letter and left it in the pages of my journal. The wind that night was soft, and I dreamed of a garden full of white flowers, growing wild and free. When I returned to Asheville, life settled into a steady rhythm. The foundation continued to flourish, and the children grew taller, more confident. One afternoon, as we celebrated Charlie's 12th birthday, he asked, "Grandma, do you ever miss her?" I thought carefully before answering. "Sometimes," I said, "but missing someone doesn't mean you want them back. It just means a part of you remembers what should have been." He nodded, as if he understood far more than his age allowed. That night, after everyone left, I stood by the window, watching the lights of the town below. The moon hung full and round, its reflection dancing on the river. I realized that the story I once thought had ended in tragedy had become something entirely different, a testament. I had started as a woman betrayed, transformed into a survivor, and ended as something else entirely, a witness to the power of beginning again. My daughter's name no longer defined my legacy, my choices did. As I turned off the light and prepared for bed, a thought settled quietly in my mind, the kind that doesn't demand attention but stays with you anyway. Sometimes justice isn't the loud punishment of those who wronged you. Sometimes it's the quiet joy of living long enough to outlast them. And as the night deepened, I knew with certainty that peace wasn't something I had found. It was something I had built, one scar, one breath, one sunrise at a time. The years that followed unfolded quietly, like the slow turn of pages in a book I had once feared to finish. Asheville became my home in every sense, its rhythm, its air, its silence. I learned to live without checking the locks twice or flinching at the sound of my name. Time has a way of smoothing even the sharpest memories, though it never erases them completely. Some scars simply turn into wisdom written on the skin. By the time I turned 72, the foundation had grown into something far larger than me. Ryan ran it with quiet strength, balancing compassion with practicality. Claire had expanded the programs for victims of elder exploitation, and the community garden was now a place where survivors planted their beginnings, roses, herbs, and hope. I often walked there at dusk, listening to the sound of laughter, the voices of people who had once been voiceless. Each time I thought, this is what survival looks like when it learns how to bloom. One evening in late summer, Ryan called. His voice was heavy but steady. "Mom," he said softly, "Lila passed away this morning. Heart failure. It happened in her sleep." For a moment, I said nothing. The world didn't tilt, and the air didn't change. The clock ticked on the wall, the kettle hummed on the stove, and somewhere outside, a nightbird sang. The news didn't break me. It only settled into the quiet parts of me that had been waiting. "Are you all right?" Ryan asked. "Yes," I said, after a long pause. "I think I've been preparing for that sentence for years." I hung up and walked to the porch. The horizon was pink and gold, the kind of sunset that looks too beautiful to be real. I sat there until the light faded, until the sky turned violet and the stars appeared. I didn't cry. I just whispered, "Rest, child," though I wasn't sure which of us I was saying it for. The next morning, I went to the garden. The volunteers were already there, tending to the beds. I found Anne crouched by the roses, her face flushed with the joy of creation. She looked up at me and smiled. "Grandma, these grew faster than we thought. Maybe the soil likes you." I knelt beside her, touching the petals soft, alive, fragrant. "Maybe it just likes being cared for," I said. That day, I realized grief had changed shape. It no longer felt like a wound. It was a landscape, something I could walk through without getting lost. A few weeks later, a small package arrived at the foundation addressed to me. It came from the prison chaplain. Inside was a plain envelope and a note. "She asked that you have this." My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, Lila's handwriting neat and deliberate. "Mom, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even know if I want it. But I finally understand something you said once, that love without truth isn't love at all. I don't know when it started to die in me or what I became, but I know I learned to mimic love because I saw how deeply you gave it. Maybe that was my curse and your strength. You can throw this away if you want. I just needed you to know that in the end, I remembered the sound of your voice humming while you cooked. It was the only thing that made the dark quieter. L." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it in the drawer, where I kept the Foundation's earliest documents, the first mission statement, the first donation receipt, the first photo of a woman we helped. I didn't keep it out of sentimentality. I kept it as proof that even monsters can recognize light before the end. That night, I dreamed of her as a little girl again, running barefoot through the yard, the sky bright above her. But this time, I didn't wake with the ache of loss. I woke with gratitude that memory could still offer softness. As autumn arrived, the Foundation held its annual gathering. Survivors, volunteers, and families came from across the state. The hall was filled with the scent of coffee and flowers, the murmur of voices sharing second chances. When it was my turn to speak, I stood before them and felt the weight of every chapter I had lived, every betrayal, every courtroom, every quiet dawn that followed destruction. "I used to think healing meant forgetting," I told them. "But healing means remembering without letting the memory rule you. It means turning pain into something that serves others. It means standing in the ruins of what hurt you and deciding to build instead of burn." For years, I thought my story ended in survival. But survival isn't the end, it's the threshold of a better story. The applause was warm and long, but what moved me most were the faces older women with lines of resilience, young mothers with cautious hope, men learning that tenderness wasn't weakness. We were all part of something larger than fear. Later that evening, I sat outside as the event lights dimmed. The stars hung low, and the air smelled of earth and smoke. Ryan joined me, handing me a blanket. "You okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "I finally am." He looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, "You know, she can't touch you anymore, not even in memory." I nodded. "I know. That's the mercy of truth. It sets you free whether you're ready or not." When he left, I stayed a little longer, listening to the wind. I thought about how love had once been my weakness, how it had been used against me, and how it had become my greatest weapon. Loving the right way, with boundaries and courage, had saved me. Loving the wrong way had almost killed me. Both truths coexisted in me now, not as contradictions, but as balance. In the distance, I could hear laughter, the volunteers cleaning up, the sound of a community that had been born from ashes. I smiled, realizing that legacy wasn't built from wealth or bloodlines. It was built from the lives we touched after reclaiming our own. Before heading home, I whispered to the night, "It's done." Not in bitterness, not even in relief, just completion. The story that had begun with poison now ended in peace. As I turned off the lights in the hall and locked the door behind me, I looked up at the moon and thought, I survived her darkness, not to forget it, but to light the path for others still lost inside theirs. And as I walked toward my car, the night seemed to shimmer a little brighter, as if the universe itself was exhaling with me. In the spring of my 73rd year, life had settled into a gentle rhythm that felt almost like music. The days were quieter, but not empty. The mornings began with the scent of rosemary drifting from the garden and the sound of children's laughter carried on the wind. My foundation no longer needed my constant presence. It thrived on its own, guided by people who once came to it seeking help and now stayed to offer it. Watching them was like seeing a garden I had planted bloom in every direction without needing my hands to tend it anymore. I spent most of my mornings writing. The book had started as a collection of journal notes, letters to the version of myself who once believed endurance was the same as strength. But as the pages filled, it turned into something else, a guide for those who had been betrayed by family yet still chose to live with grace. I titled it The Mathematics of Survival, because healing, I realized, is a kind of arithmetic. You subtract the lies, divide the pain, and add what remains of yourself until you finally arrive at truth. The process of writing forced me to revisit places I thought I had left behind. I wrote about the night of the poisoned hot chocolate, the sirens, the hospital corridor, the first time I looked into Lila's eyes and saw nothing human looking back. But instead of trembling as I once did, I wrote with calm. Words became fences, boundaries between what I had lived and what I had learned. One afternoon, Ryan came to visit with the children. They were taller now, Anne had begun painting, and Charlie had joined the school orchestra. After dinner, Anne handed me a folded paper. "It's for you," she said shyly. I unfolded it. Inside was a drawing of our family standing in front of the garden, but this time there were no shadows behind us. "Do you like it?" she asked. I couldn't speak for a moment. I just nodded. "It's perfect," I whispered. Later that evening, Ryan lingered after the kids went to play outside. "Mom," he said, "I heard you're finishing the book." "I am," I replied. "But it's not really about me anymore. It's about everyone who ever mistook love for safety." He studied me quietly. "Do you ever think about her?" "Not like I used to," I said. "I used to replay everything, what I missed, what I forgave. Now I just remember that I survived her, and that survival came with a purpose." He smiled faintly. "You turned a curse into a calling. That's rare." "It's necessary," I said. "If you don't turn pain into something that helps others, it will eat you from the inside." After he left, I sat on the porch, watching the sunset bleed into the mountains. The sky looked almost like an open wound healing over. I thought of how many women in the world were still sitting in kitchens like mine, wondering if their own daughters, sons, or spouses had turned into strangers. I thought of how betrayal doesn't always look like violence. It sometimes looks like politeness, smiles, and carefully brewed tea. That was why I kept telling the story, not because I needed to relive it, but because silence is what allows monsters to grow. A month later, the first proof copy of my book arrived. The cover was simple: white background, one line of text, and a faint image of a wilted rose beginning to bloom again. When I held it, I didn't feel pride as much as relief. I had finally given shape to something that had once only existed as pain. The launch took place at the Foundation's new conference hall. Over 100 people came, survivors, donors, volunteers, and strangers who said the story had reached them online. As I stood on stage, I saw faces from every walk of life: teachers, retirees, single mothers, widowers. Each of them carried a kind of light that can only exist in people who've been through darkness. I once believed the worst thing that could happen to a person was betrayal, I told them. But betrayal, painful as it is, also forces you to wake up. It destroys illusions that were killing you slowly. The real tragedy isn't being betrayed, it's staying blind to who's holding the knife. The audience was silent, completely still. But survival, I continued, isn't revenge, it's revelation. It's realizing that you can lose everything and still have something left worth saving yourself. After the applause, people came forward to thank me. An older woman clutched my hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Your story saved my life," she whispered. "I left my son's house last month. I realized what he was doing wasn't love, it was control." I squeezed her hand gently. "Then you already won," I said. "Freedom begins with one brave step." When the event ended, I stayed behind alone in the hall. The lights were dim, and a soft hum filled the room. I looked at the empty chairs and thought about the strange symmetry of life. I had once stood in a courtroom, trembling under fluorescent light, accused and ashamed of believing too much in love. Now I stood in another kind of courtroom, one built of hope and honesty, defending not my innocence but my truth. That night, I walked home under a sky clear enough to see the Milky Way. The air was cool, and every breath felt clean. I realized I had reached a kind of peace that wasn't loud or triumphant. It was quiet, almost invisible. It lived in small things: the smell of bread baking, the sound of children's laughter, the steadiness of my heartbeat. Weeks later, my publisher called to say the book had reached its first printing milestone: 10,000 copies sold. "It's becoming more than a memoir," she told me. "It's starting conversations." That, more than any number, was what mattered to me. If my words could help one woman recognize danger sooner, if they could help one man break the cycle of silence, then every scar had been worth it. On the night of my 74th birthday, I sat in the garden, surrounded by family and friends. Candles flickered, and laughter rose into the air. When it was time to make a wish, I closed my eyes and didn't wish for anything grand. I simply whispered, "Let the light stay." Because that's what healing truly is, not erasing the darkness but learning how to keep the light from going out. And as the candles melted into pools of gold, I looked around the table, the faces illuminated, the air filled with love that asked for nothing in return, and I realized this was the ending I had been searching for all along. Not the victory of revenge, but the quiet glory of peace that no one could ever poison again. By the time I reached 75, life had become a quiet composition: soft notes of morning light, the rustle of garden leaves, the laughter of children echoing through the yard. The chaos that had once defined me had dissolved into stillness. I no longer measured my days by what I had lost, but by what had chosen to stay. The book, The Mathematics of Survival, had found its way into countless hands. Letters arrived daily from people across the country, some trembling with pain, others steady with resolve. Many wrote, "Your story gave me courage." I answered each one by hand, not because I needed to, but because connection was now my form of prayer. The foundation continued to flourish. Its branches extended into other states, and survivors I had once counseled were now counselors themselves. I watched them speak to rooms full of strangers with conviction, their voices steady and sure. It felt like witnessing light multiply. But time, even when kind, has its way of reminding you that it is finite. My health began to shift in subtle ways: a trembling in the hands, a shortness of breath that lingered too long. The doctors called it mild heart failure. I called it the body's gentle reminder that even peace must one day rest. I told no one at first. Not Ryan, not the children. I wanted to protect their calm the way they once protected mine. But secrets, even gentle ones, weigh heavy with time. One afternoon, as we walked through the garden, Ryan noticed I stopped too often to catch my breath. "Mom," he said softly, "you're not fine, are you?" I smiled. "No one ever really is, Ryan. But I'm close enough." He insisted on taking me to the doctor. Afterward, when we returned home, I sat him down and said, "Promise me something. When I'm gone, you'll keep the foundation alive." Not for me, but for everyone who hasn't yet found their way out of the dark. He looked at me for a long time, eyes shining. You're not leaving yet. No, I said gently, but I want to leave right. That night, I began recording messages, short reflections for the Foundation's archive. I wanted to leave behind more than documents. I wanted to leave a voice. In one, I said, if you're hearing this, remember, love is not sacrifice. It's clarity. Never let someone convince you that being kind means being blind. As the months passed, my body weakened, but my mind grew sharper, almost luminous, as if clarity was the final gift before departure. I spent hours watching the garden change colors, each season blending into the next with quiet grace. I thought of Lila sometimes, but not as the woman who betrayed me. I thought of her as the first lesson, the one that taught me to recognize love by what it protects, not by what it demands. One morning in early spring, I woke to find Anne sitting by my bed with a notebook. "Grandma," she said, "I'm writing your story for school, but I don't know how it ends." I smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "It doesn't end, sweetheart. It just changes narrators." She tilted her head. "What do you mean?" "One day, you'll tell it in your own way. That's how stories live forever." She nodded solemnly, as if she understood. Perhaps she did. A few weeks later, Ryan organized a small gathering at the Foundation to mark its 10th anniversary. I insisted on attending, though the doctor advised rest. The hall was filled with faces I loved, survivors, families, volunteers, and strangers who had found hope in our work. When they helped me onto the stage, I looked out at the crowd and felt something deep, tender, and final rise inside me. "I used to think survival was the end of the story," I told them. "But survival is only the first draft. What comes after the rebuilding, the forgiveness, the peace, that's the masterpiece. Each of you here tonight is proof that light can be rebuilt from ashes, not once, but again and again." The room was silent before applause began, soft at first, then thunderous. I saw Ryan in the crowd, tears on his cheeks. Anne was beside him, clutching the drawing she'd made years ago. I waved to her, and she mouthed, "I love you." That night, after everyone had gone, I asked Ryan to take me home. The moon hung full and pale above the trees, casting silver light on the path. When we reached the porch, I touched his arm. "Ryan, remember something," I said. "Pain doesn't disappear, it transforms. What once wounded you becomes the very thing that gives others hope. That's the only immortality that matters." He nodded, unable to speak. I kissed his cheek and whispered, "You did well, my son. You did better than I ever dreamed." The following morning, I woke before dawn. The world was still, the air cool. I made a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the first light spill across the mountains. Every breath felt precious, deliberate. I wrote one final entry in my journal. "I am not leaving with regret, only gratitude." The story ends not with revenge, but with peace so full it no longer needs words. When Ryan came by later, he found me still sitting there, my face calm, my hands folded in my lap, the teacup half empty beside me. The morning sun had climbed high, bathing the room in gold. At the funeral, the Foundation staff carried white roses instead of black ribbons. Ryan spoke briefly, his voice steady. "My mother's life was a lesson in transformation. She taught us that even poisoned soil can grow flowers if tended with truth." Years later, the Foundation established a scholarship in my name for survivors rebuilding their lives after betrayal and abuse. On the plaque at the entrance, engraved beneath my photograph, were the words I had once told Anne, "It doesn't end, it just changes narrators." And so, the story continued, not mine alone anymore, but theirs. 1,000 women, 1,000 men, all turning their scars into something living. Somewhere, in a quiet garden in Asheville, white roses still bloom each spring, fed by rain, sunlight, and memory. And in that endless cycle of endings and beginnings, I remain not as the woman who was betrayed, but as the voice that whispered to the broken, "You can rise, you can build, you can be free." As I look back on Evelyn Carter's story, it becomes clear that what began as a tale of betrayal transformed into something far greater, a testament to human endurance and the quiet strength that emerges when love meets truth. She lived through the unimaginable, raising the very person who sought to destroy her, confronting evil not from strangers but from blood, and still finding the courage to choose life over bitterness. Yet, Evelyn's greatest victory wasn't in surviving her daughter's cruelty, it was in reclaiming her own narrative. She turned pain into purpose, isolation into advocacy, and fear into freedom. Her foundation, her writings, and her legacy became the living proof that tragedy can be rewritten, not erased, but reshaped into wisdom that uplifts others. The heart of her journey reminds us that love, when stripped of illusions, is not blind sacrifice. It's the courage to draw boundaries, to protect what is good, and to walk away from what poisons the soul. Forgiveness, in Evelyn's story, wasn't about excusing the unforgivable. It was about liberation, the freedom to live unchained from anger. Her peace was not gifted to her. She built it, one truth, one boundary, one sunrise at a time. In the end, she taught us that survival is only the beginning. True victory lies in living without fear, in loving again without losing oneself, and in leaving a legacy that turns personal scars into light for others. Evelyn's story invites us to reflect deeply on how we handle betrayal, grief, and control in our own lives. Pain will visit all of us, but we get to decide what we build with it. We can remain victims of what broke us, or we can use it as the foundation for something that heals others. Her life shows that it's never too late to start over, whether you're 35 or 75. Protect your peace, nurture your worth, and remember that real love, whether from others or yourself, never requires you to shrink to fit someone else's darkness. Have you ever turned a painful experience into something that helped you grow or inspired others? I'd love to hear your thoughts and personal reflections in the comments so we can all learn from each other's strength. And if Evelyn's journey moved you, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing stories of courage, healing, and second chances, stories that remind us it's never too late to reclaim your light.